Hello and welcome to Book Lovers Companion, the podcast about books, authors, their craft, and more. My name is Edith, and joining me again from across the pond, another author from across the pond, is Royce Rosewood, author, actor, nerd. Let's wait, let's ask him. And here he is. Hello, Royce, and welcome to Book Lovers Companion.
Welcome, thank you.
Are you a nerd?
I would say yes, probably. I think compared to the general population and my interests in board games and computers and culture and media, that would probably qualify me as a nerd, yes.
That's absolutely great. Don't we all love nerds? Nerds are wonderful. And do you think that's also the reason why you wrote the kind of book you wrote?
Definitely. I love magic. I love robots. Why not put them together? That's the kind of stuff that, as an audience member, gets me really excited when I'm not quite sure what genre we're in, and there's a collision of tropes. So definitely, yeah, that's the media that I enjoy, whether that's books or films or games. So yeah, I was just trying to write something that I would want to read.
That's always the best intention, I mean, for an author to write what we want to read, isn't it?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And your book, Oops, I Broke the Wizard's Android, came out in September 24. And
That's right.
according to the Amazon webpage, it's for young adults from 12 to 18. Is that your intended target group for the book?
Yeah, I was trying to think about a young person. I think adults would still enjoy the book, but I was definitely writing with a young person in mind, a high schooler kind of age. I think, when I was that age, when I was, 12, 14, 16, I was reading a lot of books that, had a huge impact on me. So I think there was something about that where I was thinking about that young reader and trying to write for them. Yeah.
Mm. And before we dive a little bit further into your journey as an author, what can you tell our listeners about your book?
Sure. Like you said, it's called Oops, I Broke the Wizard's Android. It is about a young wizard's apprentice who gets assigned to a master on a distant moon. And so she has to spend a year there on a lonely tower with a wizard who's kind of losing his mind. And if that wasn't bad enough, an android shows up at some point to take her place. So it's questions about magic, who can do magic, what's the role of technology in our lives, and it's also just a lot of fun along the way.
Oh, that's true indeed. And let me dive right in.
Sure.
Where did the idea for this book come from?
Sure. So I, like I said, love science fantasy genre. It's a mix of science fiction and fantasy. I had written another novel under a pen name before, so I'd kind of done like the whole self-published thing before, and I was ready to kind of try something different, kind of under my own name, and kind of like have kind of a more of a debut. And so I was thinking about science fantasy, and I was trying to decide, what's like the bare minimum, like what's like the most basic thing that I could do. And so I thought, well, if there's a wizard in it and there's a robot in it, I think I will get there. So I just started with those two ideas. And then I was also interested in this idea of sort of an apprenticeship or, a young person kind of away from home, out of school. And so between those kind of three ideas, that's where the premise and everything kind of spun out from there. Those were the original seeds.
And thinking about your title reminds me a little bit of Philip K. Dick's book, Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep?
Sure.
Was he, or is he an inspiration, or his books? I've
read Philip K. Dick. For me, I think the the authors that I'm drawing from are more like Douglas Adams, Terry Pratchett, kind of more on the satirical comedy side. And then on the science fantasy side, Philip Pullman, who wrote his Dark Materials. So that's a big one. Those are kind of the closer authors that I was intentionally trying to draw from. Go ahead.
Yeah. No, just thought, because I think Philip K. Dick is more like adult.
Yeah.
Genre or adult author, whereas the others are more in the young adults.
Yeah, I would say I'd think Adams could kind of go either way, but I read Douglas Adams as a young adult, for sure, and Philip Pullman definitely, and definitely, and Terry Pratchett as well, yeah. So, kind of that young person, that adult author who's not writing down, but writing writing about things that are maybe a little bit more complicated, but in a way that young people can understand. That's what I was aiming for. Whether I've achieved that or not, I think is up to the audience. And some people have in their comments have mentioned Adams and Pratchett, especially. So, but they are giants. So.
Well, yeah, indeed. I mean, I've read his Dark Materials and absolutely enjoyed it. I have to say, shame on me. I haven't read The Hitchhiker's Guide Through the Galaxy.
Okay.
shame on me. I know.
That's
but we all know the secret of the universe, even though we haven't read it. But yeah, I mean, the characters, I think, would appeal to a younger audience, just like they would also appeal to, like you said before, to an adult audience. So the story itself would appeal to more than one age group, I'd say.
Yeah. And I know, like, I think still as and like, I went back and forth a lot as I was writing this, but I did decide, yes, I'm writing for a younger audience. So I definitely did have that on mind. I didn't want to ignore the adult audience, but that wasn't, I was like, no, I got to take care of my young folks. I got to give them something. So.
And it also begs the question, did you have a young adult beta reader test group?
I didn't. If I was really taking it seriously, I probably should have done that. No, I was just trying to channel my own internal young person. I did have other readers look at it, but so no, that should have been, I guess I should have probably done that. Let them know what they really think.
Oh, it would be interesting to hear their thoughts, wouldn't it? Or would have been interesting to hear their thoughts before it came out. But also the question about the characters. Where did you find them?
Oh, that's a great question. So the main character is Ninian Lightcaster. She's a young woman. She's 18. She's gone through, her wizarding education, and she's on this she has to do this apprenticeship year. It's kind of this last year, and it's away from the academy, and it's by herself with a master. Where did she come from? All the characters are different shades of me. I think is true for most authors. You try to find something that you can connect to them about. There's a lot of my wife in Ninian, someone who's academically minded and motivated and determined, who doesn't give up. But overall, like, so there's a little bit of me, there's a little bit of her, and then there's some other extra component of, I don't know, they at a certain point they start to come to life, right? And they sort of take on their own personality. So I couldn't pinpoint at one person and say, oh, it's definitely this person. She definitely came to life and started to reveal more and more of herself as I wrote through. The wizard, Salagrix, the old wizard, is also, a bit of me. That's my curmudgeonly side, my stick in the mud side, my not wanting to change or do anything different, just wanting to stay comfortable. So there's definitely shades of me in there, and people will interpret that all how they want. People are like, oh, are you writing about this? Is this like a metaphor for this person? And it's like, no, but I don't want to tell you you're wrong if that's what you see. And then the android my biggest inspiration for the android came from, I don't know, there's a comedy show called The Orville. It's like a, I don't know if you're familiar. Yeah. So Isaac was kind of my main, he's kind of who I had in mind, sort of this very sleek, very, straightforward, serious android. Yeah, so that was a character that I definitely had something in mind that I was trying to focus on and channel. And that covers kind of most of the main characters. It's a pretty sparse cast. There's a delivery boy, who's kind of a potential friend interest, a potential love interest, and then there's a frog dog, who's Ninian's familiar. And he's just a bundle of id. He's just, wants to eat and sleep and roll around. And so that's not even anything. That's just kind of more of a force of nature than a character. Yeah, that's a great question.
It's wonderful. And it's interesting that you mentioned the Orwell. It was a fantastic show, and said that it's they didn't make more seasons, but it was absolutely fantastic, especially for I think for my generation who grew up with Star Trek, the original series, and so on. It's absolutely great. And you said, channeling writing your wife a little bit within or in the character of your main one. How difficult was it to channel a 18-year-old female and get her voice right?
Yeah. So I'm an actor, so that's my training. And so, for, over a decade, that's kind of been my creative home. Is, anytime you're given a role, you have to figure out, how do I connect to this character? What parts of me fit into this character? Or, how does this character live within my own body? And there were some times where I would get a part and I would think, oh, the director has made a mistake. I should not be playing this part. My vision of myself, doesn't fit. But what I learned and had to break through was, that wasn't the right question. The right question was how does this character live and connect into my body, not whether it should or not. That decision's already been made. So through that process, I am answering your question kind of in a roundabout way. You discover that even, the characters that you think are very different from you or have nothing in common with you, there's always some part of you that can connect. And it's about finding that. And then the more that you do that, you find these different aspects of yourselves. It's really this process of self-discovery. And eventually get to the point where you just like, well, I could turn into anything. Because it's not about, it's about finding that connection point. And do I know what it's like to be a young woman on a strange moon with, with an aging wizard mentor? No, I don't know what it's like to do that, but I know what it's like to be a young person who has ambitions. I know what it's like to be a young person who has dreams and goals, and to watch those goals slowly be thwarted and taken away from you. Like, I know what that feels like. And I know what it's like to work really, really hard at something that ends up being not important in the end. So, those are the parts that I'm, connecting in. So, and hopefully, that truth comes through, even in this bizarre world.
It does, and I find it always interesting because sometimes authors say, "Yeah, I know I shouldn't, write as a male, a female main character." But otherwise, what's the point of being creative? Because as an author, you probably have never been a police officer and you write crime fiction, or you hopefully haven't been a serial killer.
Right. Yeah, exactly. There's some leap that has to be made somewhere, unless you're writing a novel that's about a writer who's writing a book, right? Which plenty of people have done. But yeah, there has to be there's some room for that imaginative, empathetic feeling of like, I haven't been in this situation, but what would it feel like if I were? And trying to write into that and discover that.
Yeah, absolutely. And the same, I think, goes a little bit for write what you know. Yes, but that would rule out sci-fi and
Uh,
fantasy
yeah,
right from the start.
exactly. So, but this was an issue that it's like I did want to have this bizarre fantastical world, but I
Yeah,
knew it had to have some sort of emotional core. I knew I had to be connecting to something real.
yeah.
So hopefully I've achieved that.
I would say so, but I mean, I've been an 18-year-old female sometime 100 years ago. Anyway, but I think you did. I absolutely think
Okay.
you
Oh,
did.
great.
And did you ever play with the idea of writing first person narration, at least in parts of the book, or
Hmm.
did it never occur to you?
It didn't. I don't know why. I think when you're coming up with an idea for a story,
Mm,
there's certain things that just sort of feel natural. And I don't
yeah.
know that I thought very hard about first person versus third person. I think that just felt what was
Mhm,
right for this story. Did I make the right call? I don't know. I know a lot of young adult
mhm,
fiction is written in the first person
mhm,
and kind of drops you into their
mhm,
head.
mhm.
And what would be different, because so much of it is told from what Ninian is aware of
Yeah.
anyway. um you know that would have been that would have been very interesting. You kind of get more into her feelings, and as she gets more frustrated and kind of uh has darker thoughts, that could have crept in. But I don't know. That's not the choice that I made early on. So that I just stuck with that. So
Oh, yeah. And what about the art of world building? Because in
mm,
fantasy, that is a huge part
mhm,
of a fantasy novel. Building your world, make it consistent.
mhm.
How did you approach that part of your writing?
Sure. I'm definitely like a soft world builder. If you think about it, people talk about hard world building versus soft world building. Hard world building being like planning out, the entire history of the eons and these factions and this history, and that's fine and that's cool. And also, I get really excited about that kind of world building too. But for me, for my process, it was all about what needs to be true in order for me to tell the story that I'm trying to tell, and I kind of work backwards. And so often I will, in the process of writing, discover something and it's like, oh, okay, well, if this is true, if there are, say, demons in this world, which I discovered in a draft, then what else, like, what else is that mean is true? Well, if there are demons, then there are probably people who work with demons. There are probably demonologists. There were probably demonologists at her school. There might have been a demonologist apprentice, anyway. Then I'm giving details for the book. But for me, it's all about kind of working backwards. And so as I discover things, then in the rewrites, it's about, in terms of consistency, okay, if this is true, then it's kind of true throughout. So I think the biggest thing I had to think about was like, what's the role in a world where both magic and technology exist? How does that work? And I tried to make the case in the book that yes, you can use magic to travel from planet to planet, but it's so difficult that it's just easier to build a spaceship. It's just easier to build a spaceship. And that was an interesting thing to think about too, in terms of the Salagrix character, who had this skill and is now no longer needed. What does that mean? What does that do to you, to a person, when you've been replaced, which is another theme in the novel. So, uh,
Mm.
yeah. So hopefully
Yeah.
that answers your
Yeah,
world
yeah, yeah,
building
yeah,
question.
absolutely. Yeah, that absolutely does. And do you think that this certain genre, because I got the impression, and I've spoken to other authors about it, that within the young adult field of writing, there is a lot of interesting ideas,
Hmm.
more so than for the adult parts of the
Mm.
book writing community.
Hmm.
Um, but also the genre itself, it offers, I would say, a lot more freedom than
Mm.
any other genre. And is it that authors choose fantasy or sci-fi because it makes it easier to tackle difficult topics, especially when we talk about young adults.
Definitely. I think there are things that, you know, it, as questions that the culture starts to become aware of. I think kind of the first place that those ideas start to bubble up is in fantasy, is in sci-fi, sort of at the dream edge of the culture. Things we're not ready to talk about fully, but just like a person might be struggling with something and have a dream and wake up from that dream and is like, oh, what does that mean? And that starts this discussion of, getting into a deeper topic. I think the culture at writ large does the same thing. And it's the artists and the writers, and especially the fantastical, speculative writers who are raising these ideas that are bubbling up that people are just starting to talk about. And to write for young adults, it also makes it a little bit softer and a little bit more innocent, and you can kind of wink. It's like, this is what I'm talking about. And I know, if we're not ready to address it fully, we can just pretend it's like a fun little kids game and we can play and imagine and then get ready for those conversations later.
Mm. Yeah, I would say so too. I mean, that's what makes it interesting and might also help young adults.
Oh, for sure. They're gonna live in the world that is built by the decisions that the current generations and the previous generations are making about these, about these topics, So yeah, they're going to inherit the decisions that we make. So yeah, they're thinking about it too, whether they're thinking about it head on or not.
Yeah. And do you also think that it might also be easier to get young people to read?
Oh, definitely. My wife and I were just talking about this because she was a big reader growing up. And then it was just like in the last 6 months that she started reading novels again. And I've seen this, described in multiple places for multiple people online, people who, went through formal education, did a lot of required reading. And then after that ends, they don't read for, a decade. I think there's something that gets kind of shut down. So I don't even, do adults, I think adults maybe just don't even read as much. I mean, certainly some adults read a novel a day, but go ahead.
Naya just said she wasn't reading for a decade or so, or other adults don't read for a decade or so. Do you mean fiction, or does it also is it also true for nonfiction? Because when you work in a certain field, you're required to read, nonfiction because to stay on top of your field.
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends. I know I went through a phase where I only read nonfiction. Because I was like, what does it matter? What am I going to learn? What am I going to be able to use from a fiction book? Not properly valuing the, even as an artist, even as a creative person, the importance of dreaming and imagining and thinking about worlds that don't exist. So I don't know. But definitely there are certain young people who just read voraciously, right? So and then at some point I think that shifts, and I don't think it doesn't have to go away if you don't want it to. It's always still there.
Yeah, for some people it is. I mean, I've always been a reader. I mean, a day without a book is a useless day usually for me. Yeah, and then you have young adults and teens, and they say, "Well, don't read. It's boring." Really?
Right.
Come on. There are so many places you can go.
Yeah, I guess I'm thinking about when I was a young person, and just reading and reading and reading. But now, I mean, this is before social media. This is before, So, young people, I don't know what they're doing. I have no idea. I assume some of them hopefully are reading. One could only hope, but I mean, obviously it's not for everyone. Obviously some people, there's so many different people, and some people are just not going to be interested in things, but
yeah, that's sad. And I mean, maybe it's computer games and whatnot. And I mean, books like yours, they take you to a different world, a different time, different space. I mean, you can live so many lives,
Exactly.
and
Yeah.
that's what makes it interesting, doesn't it?
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that when I think about, fiction versus films or TVs
Hmm.
or video
Yeah.
games, it's like what's the advantage? What can fiction do that those can't? And I think, and I try to write towards this, there's a co-creation that happens in the mind of the reader, right? Like I can suggest with words, but ultimately the picture, if or whatever, gets put together in the mind of the reader, right? So
Yeah.
they're drawing from their own references,
Yeah.
and so there's this wonderful alchemy that happens that
Yeah.
isn't quite achieved in the visual media
Yeah.
where you're
Yeah.
presented the whole picture, which can do amazing things, right?
Yeah.
But there's this other cooperative, collaborative thing that happens in fiction that is really special, I think.
I would absolutely agree, especially if those authors who have a character-driven book, for
Mhm.
example, and they do not completely describe their characters because
Yeah.
you get your own, like you said, you get your own ideas. And two people who read the same book actually read, let's be honest, two different books.
Different books, yeah. Yeah. So I tried to be conscious of that. I tried to give in my descriptions, I tried to give just enough, it's
Yeah.
like here's
Yeah.
here's what you need to know about this person. The rest, it's up to you. It doesn't
Yeah.
matter for the story that we're trying to tell.
Yeah, absolutely.
So,
I would absolutely agree. And what kind of an author are you, uh, coming to think of your creative process as a writer? Are you a planner? Or not so much a pencil, maybe? And how would you say that you develop, for example, scenes? Do you have to see them? See
mm,
them like a film in your
mhm,
head, or do you not need it at all? How would you
mm.
describe that?
I'm a pantser, 100%. I don't know the story that I'm trying to tell. I might know a couple of things, but for me, the fun is in the writing is the discovery, is, writing into something, finding something out and being like, oh, that's so interesting, and then reincorporating it into a later draft. In terms of scenes, I'm definitely a very visual thinker. I'm trying to think, what's here in my imagination that I can then communicate. Um, but that goes for all the senses, what are the sounds, what are the smells? Um, and that's what I try to do and try to bring into, to, you know, to build up the world, to make it a sensory experience that's engaging. Um, and then, as an actor and as a person who's come through the theater, I am thinking about it's like, okay, I'm designing a set, okay, what's in here? And then where are the people in relationship to each other? And then of course the dialogue, and how does that, so I'm drawing on a lot of different creative, my creative path, my creative history, in order to translate that into a novel.
Mm. And as you said, you mentioned it just now and also before, since you're an actor, is it easy for you to write dialogue or
Yeah.
easier than for others? Yeah. Yeah.
I can't compare it to others, but for me, yeah, dialogue is, because I'm also a playwright. I have a
Mhm.
couple of, I've
Yeah.
written many, many
Yeah.
plays, and I
Okay.
have
Yeah.
a couple of published plays. Um, and that's, almost entirely dialogue.
Mm.
And that's where, for me, a lot of the story lives in the characters and the words that they're saying.
Mhm.
So the challenge for
Yeah.
me was adding it in that description, and that was something
Mm.
I had to like really think about.
Mm.
Being like, okay, this scene has no description, we have no, it's just a conversation. What can I add into this scene that can, help ground it in some sort of activity or some sort of place, that enhances the story
Mhm.
that I'm trying to
Mhm.
tell. So that's something I definitely. So the dialogue came naturally, and everything else I had to work really hard
Huh. Okay.
to get into the book. Yeah.
And did you read it out loud? Because oftentimes authors say it also helps with keeping
Mhm.
your story consistent and how you describe things and how you write things and make it sound right.
Yeah. So yes, I do read out as I'm reading. That's for me. That's I also just read out loud sometimes when I'm reading anything. That's
Mm,
something that helps
mm,
me uh, break down the text
mhm,
and work through complicated
mhm,
things. But I also recorded the audiobook.
mhm.
And I will tell you that the last draft was written in the booth. So as I'm reading out things and finding mistakes, I'm making little
Yeah,
corrections,
yeah.
on my script, and that was the very final draft as I read it out to be recorded. So so yes, I did read every single word.
Okay, okay. Now, well, since you're an actor, it's easier for you
Yes.
to record your own audio because
Mhm. And I have all the
actors,
technology.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
absolutely, yeah. Usually authors, it's not their job to read their books. I
yeah.
mean, sometimes they do, but let's be honest, it's not their job. It's their job to write them, not to read them.
Exactly. So I felt like, I could leverage my expertise because I've
Yeah,
I've done audiobooks for other authors.
yeah.
So I was like,
Okay.
well, why wouldn't I do my
Yeah,
own? So yeah, so I
yeah.
did. So then I got to do the process of doing all the voices, and kind of getting to play the narrator for this story that I had written. So um yeah, so that was a lot of fun and I've gotten a lot of positive feedback on the audiobook version in particular. So
Okay. And am I right to presume that recording the audio and making that work was a bit easier than the whole self-publishing process
what do you mean?
of the novel, the written novel? I mean, self-publishing is a steep learning curve.
Yes, yes. I guess I had the advantage of having done like ACX
Mhm,
and done audiobooks on the narrator side for
mhm,
other indie
mhm,
authors before. I mean, it was many years before. I hadn't done it in about 8 or 9 years,
yeah,
but I had all the equipment. I kind of knew the whole thing. So it
mhm,
wasn't my first time around. So I had that experience that I could draw
mhm,
from.
yeah,
So yeah, but just like anything, it wasn't easy to learn the first time. I just happened to have already learned it. And it's the same thing with self-publishing. I had self-published another book under
mhm,
a pen name, so I had all of those, skills and I kind of knew the thing that I was trying to do when I published this one. So, at, at some point you got to do it the first time, like, and almost everything that I know how to do, I had to teach myself.
mm,
Um, so, at this point, it's just a question of, oh, I want to do that thing. What do I have to learn
yeah,
in order to get the result that I want?
yeah. Is
Yeah.
it that you had planned to do it that way? Going
Oh, to record
the
my own audiobook?
self-publishing? No, no, also
Oh,
to
oh,
do the self-publishing way of publishing.
yeah. Yeah, I knew I wanted to self-publish this book
Mhm,
before I wrote it. As an actor and just sort of where I was in my career, um, I got, I was getting really frustrated with gatekeepers,
mm,
and just being able to be seen, even just to
mm,
get into the room, the challenge that it sometimes is.
yeah,
And so this project was not. I didn't want to deal with that. I didn't want to get anybody's approval. I didn't want to
mm,
get anybody's, say so. I just was like, I just want to write the book that I want to write, and I want to be the final decision maker on every single
mm,
word.
yeah,
And I don't want to have to negotiate with anyone else. And so, that was just me where I was at for this
yeah,
book,
yeah,
just getting it out. And now, of course, the challenge is then you also have to sell it yourself, which is a whole other thing. And what I've done, I've done, okay, but still not great. But that's, just one other thing to learn. And it's an ongoing
yeah,
process. So,
yeah. I sometimes ask self-publishing authors how they experienced the writing community, if at all, or because you
hmm,
can't sit. I mean, of course, you sit on your own in front of your computer or your writing bed, and the whole process is a very lonely one. But
yeah.
you also get input from other authors, from a whole
Hmm.
community, if you wish so. Is it
Hmm.
something you did or not at all?
I was involved in a writing group, an online writing group, for a time while I was working on this, and I did share drafts that I was working on with this book in particular. So I did get some feedback that way. Um, I love the idea of connecting with other writers, and I feel like I just haven't quite found my people yet. The people who I feel like we're talking about it the same way and thinking about it in the same way. Um, a lot of people are either really market focused, especially in self-publishing, which is fine, of like, I'm writing this trope for, this audience, and it's, a 5-book series, and, I'm just banging them out. And it's like, okay, cool. That's fine. That's very different from how I'm thinking about and approaching this work. Not that I'm totally unaware of the audience, but I'm trying to, for me, this was a book about exploring the genre, right? And kind of pushing the genre in a way, which was, in a market, from a market perspective, probably a mistake to write into a genre that doesn't have a category on Amazon. But that was not the book that this was the book I wanted to write, so that's, I had to follow the dream. I had a dream about what I was trying to do. So, but yeah, I'm open to working with other writers. I'm trying to find my people. So,
people you feel comfortable with and sharing your ideas with.
yeah, I think, or people who see it the same way, people who are interested in genre as a tool, and get excited about, I'm putting these things together, and so
I do understand. It's not that easy to find. And do you also, like others, because I had other guests who, I always see them on social media when they are at book fairs, in their area and so on, to self-promote what they have done. Is that something you do occasionally?
I have done a little bit
Regularly?
of that. Yeah, I've had a booth at a book festival, and that for me was more about, I didn't really think I was going to sell any books, and I didn't, but I did meet a lot of other writers, and just to chat. So yeah, that's something I've done a little bit, and something I want to do more of. It's just, it's hard to fit that in between work and kids and, all the other things that I'm trying to do. So, but it's not, the other thing that I think, it's like, it's not going anywhere, I wrote this book and I want to write more books. But that's just something that I'll have to figure out, for the future.
Yeah, I would say, I agree, because you said you wrote the book you wanted to read. That's your labor of love. And you're happy when you sell it, but it's just, you had to, isn't it? I mean, you had to write this book.
Yeah.
You wouldn't be happy if you hadn't.
No. So, it is nice to, I love thinking about that instead of all the books I didn't sell. No, it's, I do have to take my win for writing a book that I'm proud of. So, yeah.
That is a perfectly fine, I would say. I mean, like you said, there are lots of authors who write for the market.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I always wonder, how do you do that? I don't get it. Because Jeffrey Deaver said it once. He looks at the market and he gets an idea what people would like, and then he writes his book. And I always wonder, how? How do you do that? And why?
I think like, the idea for a book comes from anywhere, right? And so if your idea is coming from, an Amazon category keyword list, like that's a seed, that you can nurture and spin out into anything. I think the question is, what's going to push you to finish, it has to be, there has to be some sort of passion behind it. You have to find some sort of personal connection, I think, to that. Otherwise, without it becoming just totally rote. So like, I can imagine how that works. And I'm like, ooh, but that's a lot of work to put into something that I'm not like 100% committed to,
I would like the passion.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
Right for the market. Yeah. It's absolute. Yeah. It has its value. Don't get me wrong, but I don't know if it's not for everyone, I suppose.
I don't think so. Yeah.
May I ask, because I was wondering when you spoke about developing your book and your characters and so on. And stupid question, but it was a thing, and I suppose it's still a thing. to not give away that you are male when you wrote a female main character, because I was asking my students only, I don't know, I think on Friday, if they would read, especially the boys, because that was the reason why J.K. Rowling was J.K. Rowling, because she was a woman and the publishers feared boys wouldn't take up her book. And my students said they don't care if it's written by a man or a woman. Just if they like the story, they don't care.
Yeah. I definitely think that used to be the case in publishing, and I know J.K. Rowling is one, and then there was a series of books that I read growing up by an author named K.A. Applegate, who I didn't learn was a woman until much later. And I think that used to be kind of the publishing, at least in the trad world, kind of the, especially for young authors, kind of the advice that was given. And I don't know if that's still the case or if that's still done. I didn't think about that or worry about that. I was writing the character that I was writing, and I would, I hoped that the people who want to read it will find it, and enjoy it, regardless of me and my connection to this character or not.
There's only one thing they said. I can't remember what they said about male characters. I think it was a bit about action. And I said, but the women are more violent. And the girl said, yes. Yeah.
So there you go.
They are bloodier. Absolutely. Royce, what would be your advice for any other author, be it sci-fi, fantasy, or anything else, who wants to go down, for example, the self-publishing route?
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot to learn. So, know that going in. And, there's, even after you're done, there's still going to be more to learn. So have an attitude of being, a constant learner, and, be aware that, there's some things you might have to put aside and learn later. So that's one thing. And then I think the other thing is just be really clear about why you're writing this book. Are you writing this book because it's this book that you have to write? That's going to inform a lot of your decisions. If you want to write a book that's going to sell, a lot of copies, that's going to inform a lot of your decisions. So yeah, just be really clear and honest with yourself about what you're trying to do with this project, and then follow through, and then make the choices that lead to that result. Yeah.
Absolutely agree. And do you personally have a certain interest in other genres which you would like to try out? Or would you say you will stay in the, niche sort of fantasy, sci-fi?
Yeah. So, I mean, I love science fantasy so much. It's really hard to imagine writing another book that isn't that. But the great thing about science fantasy is that once you've already added science fiction and fantasy together, it sort of opens this space where any other genre can come in. In this book, there's a whole section that's sort of a Western feel, and then of course there's, sort of this sense of it being an academy, it's not quite an academy novel, but it is that, it's a sort of a travel novel. So I was actually writing down some ideas for another book that would be kind of more of like a detective, set in the same kind of universe as this one, but more of a detective feel. So that's something that kind of got me excited not too long ago. So we'll see. I don't really have a lot of time to write right now, but that could be a potential future project if I want to do this again. Writing a book is a lot of work.
Oh yeah.
But I got really excited about that idea. So we'll see. We'll see.
Yeah, but because it would have been my next question about your future plans. So more like the detective crime fiction?
A detective science fantasy. So it'd be similar to this world, where there's planets and but then there's also gods and magic and that was the idea. So we'll see. But there's also, I have more Ninian stories too. I've got about 20,000 words on a sequel to this. So, that could be a thing. At this point, it's just about having time to write. So whenever that happens again, whenever I have time, it'll be to, what's the next project?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
We'll see
would
what
you
wins out.
say you would like to keep it light if you went down the crime fiction, detective way?
I think part of the detective genre sort of demands a sort of darkness. So I think that would have to be a part of it. But I think it would be really fun to kind of juxtapose that against sort of a whimsical alien world, where there's these bizarre creatures, but then there's these, crimes and villains and murders and there's a really interesting tension there, which is one of the things that got me really excited about that idea. So
Well, as a father yourself, and I know it's difficult to make to open that can of worms, but um, where would you draw the line in young adult fiction?
That's a great question, and I think it's definitely changed since I was a young adult. I think a lot of the things that have come down the pipe since, Hunger Games, and these books that are, for young adults, but really push the boundaries of what's kind of permitted or acceptable. So I think for me at this point, it's that answer is less about content and more about, first of all, I think the age of the main character is really important. I think it would be really it would be a really hard sell to have like an old man be the main character of a young adult novel. I think maybe you could do it, but I think that's the biggest thing. And then the second thing, I think it's more about a perspective. I feel like young adult novels are about, they tend to be about learning. They tend to be about growing, right? It's about a young person who's coming into new knowledge, right? And so regardless of like what the other content is, I think that's kind of that's where I draw the what is it's kind of a harder question to answer, but it's kind of what's the general ethos of the book, because you could definitely have a book where the young person is the main character, but it is not a book for young people, right? In terms of the questions that it's asking and what it's asking the audience to do. So that's my answer. It has to do with the age of the character in addition to the sort of world perspective that it has. Is it about kind of growing, learning, emerging into a larger world? I think that's the key to a young adult novel, in my opinion.
Yeah, of course. And yet at the same time, like I said before, when we started our conversation, I often think that young adult authors are more daring insofar as they are open to new ideas.
Yeah.
They are not set in their ways like some adult fiction authors. Or maybe it's just my impression. Maybe I'm completely wrong.
I mean, that's the most imaginative, interesting books I've read are for supposedly for young adults,
Yeah.
So I don't know. I don't know why that's the case. I don't know if that has to do with those market questions again, where, things sort of get set and it's like, no, this is how you write a mystery novel. This is how you write a Western, and there's kind of more freedom, or if it's just something about, sort of the youth, having that idea of youth that brings in this sort of sense of boundlessness and imaginative things, whereas, adults, in general tend to be a little bit more set, in their ways and their sort of thinking.
Probably.
Yeah, probably, I don't know. It might have something to do with that.
Yeah, it could be. You could be right. We are so set in our ways. The oldies.
Yeah, right.
The older generation,
Those people, not me.
Yeah, those people.
Not
yeah.
me. I'm definitely not set in my ways.
Bring it on.
I'm definitely not an old person. No. Oh man.
And yet, at the same time, it's often wonderful when you read those characters in books. The elderly neighbor, the woman, and at a certain age, you can say whatever you like.
Yes. There's a freedom that comes at a certain point. You just stop caring, right?
Yeah.
Like, oh yeah, those are fun. Those are fun. Yeah.
I'm 80. Oh, don't give a.
What are you gonna do?
Yeah.
Kill me? Well, I'm getting there anyway.
Yeah, absolutely true. Oh, yeah. Royce, is there anything else you would like our listeners to know?
I mean, you can check out my book on Amazon. It's also available on all the major platforms. It's available ebook, paperback, and audiobook. It's also available on my website direct, which is ragamancers.com. That's RAGAMANCERS.com. And if you order from me, you can get a paperback and it's signed. And I also had these tarot cards printed up, which have I don't know if I could show it, have an image of the Wizard's Tower all drawn up, and you can have a tarot card bookmark. And that's the only place you can get it is direct from me. So if you're interested in that, check that out. Yeah.
Splendid. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And read the book.
And read the book. Yeah.
Absolutely. Royce, it was an absolute pleasure talking to you.
Yes, thank you.
It's splendid. And wait for me in the green room. Please don't go away. I'll be with you shortly. Dear listeners, I do hope you enjoyed this episode as much as my guest and I did. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. And I do hope you will also tune in for another episode. Until next time.